Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome into Locked On Sooners, your go-to podcast for everything Oklahoma football. In tonight's episode, we will be focusing on recruiting updates for the 23 class, transfer portal losses and acquisitions, and finally, looking ahead to the Cheez-It Bowl against Florida State on the 29th of December. The Sooners have had an interesting season to say the least, with many, including myself, seeing expectations not be met in Brent Venables' first year. The team struggled at really all levels at some point during the year, and it made for a really weird dynamic between fans and the team. It got so bad, need I remind everybody about that horrible Texas game, that many in Oklahoma were calling for Coach V's head after just 1 year. And while I agree with the overall frustration and sentiment that some of the fans have been feeling, firing Brent Venables would just be a terrible mistake. And one of the reasons why it would be so horrendous is because of the recruiting class that he is currently bringing in. Speaking of that recruiting class, you can't look at it without mentioning a guy like Jackson Arnold. Jackson Arnold, who is currently ranked the 9th overall prospect in the 23 class, stands at 6'2", can throw a ball nearly 75 yards, and is the first five-star quarterback Oklahoma has had since Caleb Williams. And this is such a big deal for not only the university, but also the program and the coaching staff because of the guy who just left, Lincoln Riley. Lincoln Riley was such, a quarterback whisperer and considered such a great coach that the fact that we can still go out and recruit not just a great quarterback or a high level quarterback, but an elite quarterback, a guy who's top 3 at his position, it means something. It's a big win for Jeff Lebby, the offensive coordinator, but also Brent Venables. His size and throwing power are nearly unmatched beyond, obviously, Arch Manning, who's considered the best quarterback in the class. Like I said, 6'2", 75-yard bomb. But what I really like about Arnold, more so than some of the other guys, like Arch Manning, is his high school dominance. If you go to look, he plays for Denton Guyer down in Texas. They are absolutely smoking everybody that play. I think their whole season, they've beaten everybody by at least 29 points, with the exception of not this game, but the game before this game in their playoff run. That was their hardest game. That was the second best team in the state of Texas at 6A football. They are going to win a state championship. And he hasn't just been playing good or leading that team. He has been dominant throughout this whole season. He's thrown for 4,000 yards, rushed for another 1,000. He has 30 something touchdowns to about 4 interceptions last time I checked. I mean, he's just utterly brilliant. And the fact that even though it's high school football and that nothing's a guarantee when you transition to the college level, the fact that he's doing this against Texas 6A football, where there are 5-star recruits, where there are 4-star guys, where there's guys going to Texas, Texas A&M, Alabama, Oklahoma, USC, Ohio State, the fact that he's doing that, it should mean a little bit more than what, say, an Arch Manning is doing in, I believe, 2A Mississippi football. Even though Arch Manning has the legacy, there's a different level of competition there that needs to be recognized. Some of the other recruits that they're bringing in is 5-star edge rusher. I'm going to butcher his name. Adepoju Adebawore. And then also Makari Vickers, Jacoby Johnson, Samuel Asamingo, Derek LeBlanc. I mean, you could go on. I mean, even down at the bottom, some of the 4-stars we're getting: Jason Wagner, Heath Ozetta, Kenyon Brown. These guys on the defensive side of the football, we have not seen this level of recruiting at Oklahoma since really Brent Venables was here 15 years ago. It's something that's been sorely missing in what a lot of fans, including myself, really point to as the downfall of Oklahoma and why, we can't fight or compete at really the elite levels. And what I'm talking about with the elite levels is not even necessarily the Big 12, but during Lincoln Riley, those playoff runs when we had Heisman winning quarterbacks, Kyler Murray, Baker Mayfield, Jalen Hurts was a runner-up. Our defenses were just so horrendous. And a lot of that was recruiting. We weren't getting 5-star guys. We weren't getting guys like PJ Adebawore. We weren't getting guys like a Jacoby Johnson, Makari Vickers. Like these guys are ranked top 100 in the country, and that's a big deal, specifically on that defensive line. Football is won and lost in the trenches. You cannot have a good football team or be successful as a football team at any level if you don't have a great offensive line and a great pass rush. You just won't do it. We saw this year that was the big struggle when we fell apart and why our defense was so bad and why Brent Venables, who's an excellent defensive coordinator and has a great mind, just couldn't get these guys to play. It's because you have no pass rush. With all respect to guys like Jalen Redmond, who's a fifth-year senior, Jeffrey Johnson, who transferred here from Tulsa, who is a fifth-year senior, I believe, they just couldn't get it done. I think our highest sack total was 5 this year, and that was from Alexander Coe, who wasn't even one of the big names, supposedly. I mean, he was by the end of the year, but supposedly at the beginning of the year. So the fact that he's bringing these guys in means something, and if they can coach worth their salt, with this level of talent, you almost are guaranteed to succeed at least a little bit. Not win a championship, not even get to the playoff, but not have the type of season that we just had. And speaking of, the type of guys that we want here, you can't mention this 23 class without mentioning 2 names, and that is Peyton Bowen and David Hicks. If you're unfamiliar with these 2 names, they're 2 of the best football players in the entire country. David Hicks, a guy who is top 10 nationally on every recruiting site, and Peyton Bowen, a guy who's top 20 nationally on every single recruiting site. Peyton Bowen, who is a safety, is currently committed to Notre Dame. And this has been an interesting recruitment because he's been committed to Notre Dame since February of this year. So a really long time. And so when you look at that, you're like, okay, why is he talking to us? It's because he's made 17 trips to OU this year since he's been committed to Notre Dame. And that's odd for a recruit of his caliber. You'd think once he's committed, he's committed. He's not going to change that decision, especially when Notre Dame, although they struggled at the beginning of the year, really turned it around and I think had a pretty good season overall. Considering everything that they went through with their coaching staff. And a big reason I think that we're seeing this flip specifically from Peyton Bowen is his relationship with 1, Jackson Arnold, and 2, his girlfriend. So Jackson Arnold, who we mentioned earlier, is the best recruit in our class right now, 3rd best quarterback in the country. He plays on the same team as Peyton Bowen. Peyton Bowen's a safety. Jackson Arnold's the quarterback. And while they're on 2 different sides of the field, they're best friends by all accounts. Travel together, share the same car, come up to trips to OU together, hang out all the time. And I think that relationship is really pushing him to come and stay because it's like, oh man, I really want to play with my boy. I really want to be with my friend. We can dorm together. We can eat together. It'll be awesome. And another thing that's playing into that is his girlfriend, by all their counts and listening to the rumor mill a little bit, they're really tight and they might be long-term. You look on Instagram, they're really close, and she just committed to play soccer for the University of Oklahoma. So you look at that situation and you look at a guy like Peyton Bowen and you can kind of decide like, man, I see where he's kind of leaning. It's like, I really like Notre Dame. And that may be true for him. He can totally be in love with the coaches and the campus, but it's like, man, am I really about to pack up and leave everything, go farther away from home, not be able to see my girlfriend, but once every month, not be able to see my best friend probably once a month, even longer, if that's allowed under NCAA or everything. And it seems his parents are kind of leaning in the same way. Mom really likes Notre Dame. Dad really doesn't, but I think they are starting to see the signs lean towards OU. And if you follow crystal balls, guys like Steve Wilfrong, who's a reporter for SI Insider, guys like Gavin Charles, who's in the Scooped on Sooners scene, people who are really in touch say that this flip is coming and that he's just waiting for his Texas state championship to be over. don't cause any distractions for the teammates. Hey, I'm not worried about it. Hey, I'm focusing. And I can certainly respect that because he's one of the best players in the country. And if you flip from Notre Dame to Oklahoma, every single person is going to be like, oh man, what's going on? And that's all going to be the questions. It's not going to be about football. It's about to be personal life. So I understand why he's holding off. If you were to put a gun to my head today and say, tell me where he's going, I would say he's going to OU. And I know he's committed, and I know that probably has to mean something, and we're fighting to get him, but it just makes too much sense, right? Like, he needs to come to this institution. It makes the most sense for him. His best friend's here, his girlfriend's there, his parents like it, it's close to home. The coaching staff is great. I think in the end, he comes to his senses, and I think he picks OU. Following that, the next guy you have to point to is David Hicks, who I'm, I'm calling him Rainbow Man because he is full of joy and full of happiness, but he has no idea what he's doing. He loves playing football. And that's about all he loves doing by all accounts. And from what I'm told, he's a really interesting recruit to follow and see his journey go ahead, because he was an OU, not commit, but one of those guys that's predicted to go to OU for a very long time. He had a really close tie with Todd Bates, who's our defensive line coach, and Brent Venables, who's the head coach, really tight with them. And when he announced that he was going to announce his commitment early, he was one of those guys that was going to be a national signing day. And then back in September, he was just kind of flipped it and was like, hey, I'm announcing on Wednesday. And everybody was like, oh, that's great. He had just come off a visit to OU that Saturday, and all signs point toward his Sooners. And even up until an hour, I remember watching that, and a prediction came down from Steve Wilfong that he is going to go to the Sooners. That was an hour before he committed. And about 15 to 10 minutes, you kind of saw people panicking on the TV. Reports started to come down that it's not the Sooners, it's Texas A&M. And that ended up being what happening. It was a huge shock, huge scandal, if you will, in the, if football recruiting with 18-year-olds can be scandal. It was. A lot of people point towards the NIL money, and NIL has become such a dirty word. I think these are 17 and 18-year-old kids from, let's just say, less than fortunate backgrounds sometimes. And if a school goes to them and says, hey, you know what? We have this car dealership, and if you come and sign some signatures, they'll give you a car, or hey, if you do these signatures, show up to this event, yada, 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 throughout the season, we'll give you $1.5 million. Who's going to turn that down? I mean, we can all think back. I mean, we don't even have to think back. If somebody was to offer me, say, hey, forget the Sooners, forget OU, come to Arkansas and we'll give you a butt ton of money, and all you have to do is trash them or come to this, I'd do it in a heartbeat. Who's going to deny that sum of money? And I think we're too aggressive on these kids, and that seemed to be what happened. Texas A&M is big spenders. He changed his mind about 15 minutes before all this came down. You can read what's on the wall. As my mama used to say, it doesn't take a blind man, or a deaf man to hear what's actually going on, when it's right in front of you. And I think that a lot of OU fans gave up on David Hicks, and I certainly did. I thought, well, it's over. And then Texas A&M season happened, which somehow, even though OU's season kind of fell apart there in the middle, Texas A&M had a whirlwind. They were 4-7, until they barely beat LSU there at the final game of the season. And good old Jimbo Fisher might not be surviving very longer. If he has, they'll probably give him one more year. I'd be shocked if he gets fired, just because they're kind of stuck with him. And who are you going to hire if you fire Jimbo? So I think that he'll stick around for one more year, but if he has another one like that, he's pretty much out of there. And they spend so much money on their recruits. Last year, they had the best recruiting class in the history of football. over Alabama, over Georgia, and a lot of that was due to NIL money. If you look at their tax records, they spent I believe anywhere in the ballpark of $35 million to $42 million on these recruits last year. So it wouldn't be shocking if they went and offered David Hicks the bag. But as their collapse kind of happened throughout the season, we're seeing him, I guess, be more open and a little bit looser in his recruitment. That commitment to Texas A&M is more of a, yeah, I'll go here, maybe type of deal. And that was really cemented when he took official visit to Bedlam. And that's when the ball got rolling again. This is a guy that every Sooner fan, including myself, wants. He's dominant. He's going to be a star wherever he goes. Like, I am telling you right now, this kid will be a star. He will be playing the NFL. He will play on Sundays. He's probably going to be a top 10 draft pick. That's how good of a talent he is at the defensive line. And now that we have a chance for him again, it gets people really excited. But it's also, with his recruitment, I'm a little bit more shaky than I am for a guy like Peyton Bowen, because David Hicks doesn't have ties to Oklahoma besides good word. And not that Oklahoma is poor or we can't offer him the bag. It's just not necessarily in our character to. That goes back to our coaching staff and kind of our boosters. We don't offer players money to come play for us. We have a little bit higher of, call it snottiness, but we hold ourselves higher a little bit, where we say, hey, we're Oklahoma. We don't need to spend money to get you to play here. You play here because we're the University of Oklahoma. And I think that's kind of what we're doing with David Hicks. I think it's really 50-50. And I know there's a lot of people saying, there's a lot of my sources that have told me, hey, he's probably going to come play for OU. I'm just not so sure that he is. There's a lot of competition. Texas A&M is still in there. Oregon is making a huge push with NIL, with their coaching staff. I just don't think OU comes away with it. Not like Peyton Bowen. Peyton Bowen, I'm pretty sure. David Hicks, I don't see it happening unless we get really lucky. And hey, I will be the first one to admit it when I'm wrong. And I hope to God I am wrong, because he's going to be so good at the collegiate level. He's going to play as a true freshman for any school. I mean, he could go in and walk in at Georgia and go play for them as a true freshman. He's that good. So I hope and pray that he comes here. I just really don't think it's going to happen. I don't think it's in the cards. As much as people want to hope and, pray, and how many predictions come down, I don't really see it happening. It doesn't make sense to me. And if you don't get a guy like David Hicks, now you're looking at your class for the defensive line. And while it's very good, it's very fresh. And with guys like Jeffrey Johnson, Jalen Redmond, Isaiah Coe leaving this program, you need to fill in some depth. And that's where the transfer portal comes in. And I know, naughty word, transfer portal. Depending on your age, it seems like there's a real barrier that everybody over the age of 30 just gets really salty and some naughty words come out when the transfer portal gets mentioned. But it's college football right now. We have to accept it. And the transfer portal giveth and the transfer portal taketh. It's a blessing and it's a curse. We have tons of guys that have left in this transfer portal. Off the top of my head, Theo Weiss is a huge one. Jordan Mukes, Joshua Eaton, Kendall Dennis, Alton Tarber from last year's class, Ralph Rucker, who's a quarterback, Nick Evers from last year's class, the 4-star quarterback, Bryson Washington, Bray Walker. Everybody remember him from, he's been here, 5 years, never really done anything. It's a lot of guys. I think it adds up. Last time I checked, I think 12 guys that are transferring out of Oklahoma, and you see that, and it's like, oh, alarm bells, ding, 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 ding. Get scared time. But I don't think it's that worrying as people are making it out to be. Looking at the names I just listed, outside of Theo Weiss, who had about 330 yards on 60 receptions this year, who contributed to this team? Bray Walker, although he was a 5-star, played 2 snaps in 5 years. Bryson Washington played maybe 20 snaps this year. Nick Evers, as talented as he was, didn't play for whatever reason, much to the chagrin of myself and a lot of the other fans. But we won't get into that. Alton Tarber was a guy that kind of hurts because he was freshman, got hurt this year, didn't get a lot of playing time. I guess just wants his opportunity elsewhere. Respect to him. That's what happens now. Outside of those guys, there's really not a lot. The biggest thing that you're missing is the depth. And depth in football is a huge thing. If you don't know or you haven't played the game, you get really tired easily. Even in playing like 4 or 5 guys on a rotation, you get tired fast, especially on that defensive line. So BV and company are gonna have to go out and get some dudes. They've already done that in the secondary and one guy in the defensive line, Kendall Doby, from Northeastern Oklahoma A&M. If you haven't heard of this dude, get used to his name, Kendall Doby. He is a corner. He's fast. He's electric. He's a playmaker. He has 3 years left, I believe. He went the JUCO route. Grades weren't good a couple years ago. He is uber talented. Just won Player of the Year in his conference at the Division II level. He's a killer. I'm really happy we got him because we were competing with Texas A&M. And anytime you can get a win over, your rivals like that, it kind of feels good. And the other guy we landed already is Jacob Lacey. He's a nose guard from Notre Dame. If you ask Notre Dame fans, they'll say they're happy to get rid of him. I'm happy to have him because he brings in that depth. He's a big boy. I think 310 pounds, standing at 6'1", 6'2", around there. It adds that depth and experience. He's played for 2 seasons. He really came alive at the beginning of this year before getting injured. I think he had 3 sacks in 4 games. I think he'll be a really good piece, not a star, but a really good piece for that rotational defense. A big guy, hard worker, good energy that this coaching staff can use. And we're so young. It'll be nice to have that kind of, I guess, experience and leadership, and an older guy in that locker room will be like, hey guys, we're fine, hey, well, let's not panic, hey, motivational speaking, let's get out there and go. And I think that really says a lot about where this coaching staff is looking. You're not necessarily recruiting the top guys, a guy like Trey Sanders who just announced he's going into the portal from Alabama. You're going after needs and not just the best players. And that gives me even more confidence because that tells me the coaching staff isn't panicking. They're not going after Bryson Washington. They're not going after some of the Jackson State guys who are inevitably going to transfer after Deion Sanders left. I think that's a big deal and good for our roster and our healthy improvement and continued improvement that we are going to show next year. But the biggest thing that we need to focus on is actually developing players. We struggled this year playing freshmen and letting our freshmen improve. I think the guys that really only got snaps was Jaron Kanik at linebacker and Aaron Mason Thomas at the edge. And it just puzzles me because now they're going to have to come in at the ball game. And they're going to have to perform. In this bowl game, for anybody that doesn't know, we're playing in the Cheez-It Bowl, formerly the Athletic Bowl in Orlando, Florida, against Florida State. And it's an interesting situation because Florida State's really stinking good. Better than us. And I'll be the first one to say it. And you're going to have to face those guys with youth, excuse me. And that scares me so bad because I really wanted to win this, go out in this season on a high note. We lost to Texas Tech in the last game in heartbreaking fashion. And now you put us against Florida State, who's a much better team than us. Florida State went 9-3 this year. We went 6-6. For anybody that tells you we deserve to be in this game against Florida State, we do not. We do not. Oklahoma State does. Texas Tech does. not Kansas State. Kansas State's going to play Alabama. But there's a couple teams in the Big 12 that deserve this over us, and we got this game because of our name, because we're the University of Oklahoma. And that kind of ticks me off and kind of makes me happy. Because one, it means we're not going to go away like Nebraska does. Nebraska famously, ever since the 90s, can't get their stuff together and has been just drowning and floundering in the mud ever since. That's not going to happen to us. God help us, cross my fingers and knock on wood. But we don't deserve to play in this game. Florida State played a really great season. They were ranked for about half the season before they went on a little bit of a losing spree. And they just beat Florida in the final game of the season. Florida, who had a disappointing season, but still is good at 6-6. They crushed Louisiana, crushed Syracuse, absolutely destroyed Miami 45-3. That Miami team is a pretty good team. Barely lost to Clemson, who had a couple losses this year, but Clemson's a good football team. Don't let anybody tell you different. Their big loss was Wake Forest at the beginning of October. That was kind of a disappointment, but regardless, they're 9-3. They've got a dangerous football team going on. And I just don't see how we're going to pull this one off. Chandler Fields, their quarterback, is fantastic. And if you're a Florida State fan, you'll look at me and think I'm crazy when saying this. He is dangerous running the football. He's a short guy. He's slippery. And Oklahoma has struggled facing short, slippery dudes this year. Need I mention that I always forget his name, but that running back, Deuce Vaughn from Kansas State, that's his name. Dude just gave me nightmares watching him just run around across the field. And that's what this dude does from Florida State. He just runs like a little pixie, just all across the field. And I don't know how we're going to be able to stop that with some of the guys that we have. Some of the guys that are not playing, I think the obvious ones is Wanya Morris and Anton Harrison from the offensive line, Jeffrey Johnson, Jalen Redmond on the defensive line. We don't know if Dillon Gabriel's going to play. We assume that he is. We don't know if CJ Colden's going to play. He has another year left. He might be NFL. We know Eric Gray isn't going to play. He's going to the NFL. So we have a lot of holes on this roster. And the big reason for me of how we win this game is if Dillon Gabriel just goes off. And I know that hasn't happened a lot this year, but that's how you win this football game, because you're not going to have Eric Gray, who's had a phenomenal season, really underrated season. I was upset that he didn't get some of the invites for the awards in New York. Not the Heisman, but some of the offensive player of the years, the running backs of the year, like he deserved it. He had a great year. I think he had close to like 1,300 yards, a couple hundred receiving yards as well. 9 or so touchdowns. I mean, he's a guy who really carried us in this season that was full of doubt and kind of upset a lot of people. He was really a star and really a highlight. And we're not going to have that at this bowl game. So we're going to have to rely on Morris, on the true freshman. His name is forgetting me right now. But we're going to have to rely on those, and to rely on young and experienced players is not a recipe to win football games. At the wide receiver position, I don't know if Drake Stoops will play. You don't know if Marvin Mims will play. So there's just holes all around. So one way or the other, we're going to get to see some of the guys we haven't seen before. We're going to get to see Jaden Gibson out at wideout, the talented true freshman. We're going to get to see Jaron Kanik on the defensive side. We're going to get to see Kobe McKenzie at linebacker, who we haven't seen this year. We might see Gavin Sawchuk at the running back position, true freshman, uber fast, speedy kid. And if Dillon Gabriel plays, you have a chance, because mixed feelings on Dillon Gabriel throughout the fan base, but he's the best we got, and he can play great football. He's shown we can play great football with him, just not consistent football with Dillon Gabriel. But if he has a great, consistent is the key, consistent game, and plays well throughout all 4 quarters, I think this is winnable. Florida State has some great defensive players who I can't name right now, but that will be playing specifically on the defensive line. So now having freshmen at the offensive line is going to make that very, very interesting to say the least. But I think it's winnable. A score prediction, I think I can't run against my Sooners. I can't do that. So I'm going to have to go 34-27 Oklahoma. And I think it's going to be close, but I think we can do it. I really do. I want to so bad. I want to so desperately go out this season on a high note, just for the recruiting, just for the feel good, and for my own selfish desires. I just want it to, I want us to be successful. I wanted us to beat Texas Tech so bad. That loss hurt me so much. I was watching with my dad, and boy, man, we were just having screaming fits against the TV, acting like Coach V and Dylan Gabriel could just like hear us through the television. And so I really want to win this game. It would mean a lot to the fan base, I think, to go out on a high note. God knows Brent Venables needs it because fans are ruthless. But that's why that's why it's a great sport. That's why they call it being a fan, because you're fanatic. So I think we can pull it off. I'm excited about it. I think it's going to be a great game either way, even though we might not deserve to be there. And when push comes to shove, I think we can get it done. As much as people would like to panic and scream that we're back in the 90s, I don't think that's the case. I really don't. For now, the best approach is cautious optimism. Oklahoma really does have a bright future, and I believe this year that it can be used as a measuring stick and a learning experience for not just the players, but this coaching staff. Most of these guys have never been in the position that they are. Brent Venables' first year. Jeff Lebby, while he was, an O coordinator at some other college, never at this level, never handling his own offense separately from the head coach. Todd Bates being a defensive coordinator hasn't happened. Jay Valai being a co-defensive coordinator hasn't happened. So I'm going to give them a little bit, not an excuse, but let them have the benefit of the doubt. We can't panic. We have to go in with optimism. We have to continue to support our school and our football team. I just want to thank you all for listening. My name is Thomas Slinger. Boomer Sooner, everybody, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Thanks.